there, everyone. This is Dr. Joan. Happy Friday. So I've been having some conversations online with a few of you. Some of the interesting things that have been coming across my screen. Hi, Jacqueline. Some of the interesting things that have been coming across my screen are some of these wild videos of, for example, a mother who was beating up on her child. He was obviously a teenager, but when I saw it, my immediate response to seeing the video was to tell whoever had put it up to take it down. And then I've been having some other conversations with some folks who are talking about race relations and the politics and the economics behind all of that, and the genocide that has been ongoing across the centuries and how that has impacted all of us. And so I've been having these conversations about what it is that I do, which is forgiveness therapy. And as I embark on the journey of building my own speaking career, then the things that I speak about are always about love, peace, hope, joy, and forgiveness. And so today I wanted to do a live and really kind of touch on a couple of topics that I think are important to chat about every once in a while. Now, a while back, almost in the very first, in the beginning of when I started posting on Instagram, I created two posts. One was about what love looks like, and then the other was about what fear looks like, and the ways in which we respond when we're actually feeling afraid of something. In my practice, one of the things that I do, hi Jacqueline, if that's you that's still online, one of the things that I do is I talk to people about the first moment in time when they actually became afraid. The first moment in time when they actually stepped away from what I call their truth. The fact that is that we're all valued, that we're all loved, that we're all treasured by a creator and a God. And that when we step outside of that truth, hi Jacqueline, thanks for being here with me, that when we step outside of that truth, we act in ways that otherwise we would not act. So I put up one post which talked about what love looks like, the fact that love is patient and kind, the fact that, hi Shiloh, the fact that love demonstrates trust and acceptance and allowance of where others are, that love is humble and treats others as equal, that love recognizes that we're brothers and sisters, and that we're really all children of a living God. And then I put up a post that was all about what fear looks like. And really, fear for me is the opposite, or not really the opposite, but it exists outside of love. So when we are afraid, we are angry, we're loud, because it's about guarding territory, and we want people to back off, so we become loud and malicious. We are quick-tempered, we're quite boastful, obnoxious, shameful, proud. All of those things are the ways in which we demonstrate fear. And in the type of therapy that I do, one of the things that I remind people of is that there is a moment in time where we first become afraid, and that there is a character to our fear, just as there is a character to our love. And all of that is established in the first moment when we become afraid in life. So let's imagine this. Let's imagine that the womb, egg and sperm come together, and we are created, and the womb becomes our universe, and from there we are birthed into this life. But we are nevertheless spiritual beings. And in that first part of life, we are perfect. But then we have these encounters that are unloving. They cause us to become afraid. They cause us to become disconnected from our source of love. In that moment is where we learn a love language and a fear language. And then that love and fear language remains with us throughout the rest of our day. So I always take people back to that first moment, and I have a way of doing that where it's not relying on your conscious memory, but it's relying on what I call your spiritual and body memory. In fact, what all of us do is we record the moments in time where we step away from the truth that we are loved. We step away from the truth that we are worthy. We step away from the truth that we are born into this life as spiritual beings and that we are children of a living God. So in that moment, we are creating an understanding that later on we must come back to. So as I do my therapy, what I do is I introduce, hi everyone, thanks for joining me today. The topic is fear and how fear develops in all of our lives. I am a forgiveness therapist, and I use the body to actually locate the first moment in time when we become afraid. And I talk in my book, which is called 490, actually 490, which is the number of times that Christ says we should forgive. I talk about a place, a moment in time that is called the room. And the room is where fear and love that is uniquely ours is assigned. It is in that moment that we can learn the greatest things about ourselves. So the room can happen at various points in time. It can happen right at the point of creation, for example, in a moment of rape. It can happen at a moment of birth, where something might actually cause us to become afraid of dying. It can happen later on as we go through our childhood, our adolescence, and usually by the time we reach our adolescence, we've experienced the room. And it's for us to go back to that moment in time and then discover a few things. So when I take my clients back to the room and I begin to talk to them about the wisdom that is hidden there, we talk first about what the person wanted. And these are the needs that each of us desire in life. So I ask the question of the person, and I'll give an example. So, for example, a person experiences at age 5 a punishment from, say, a father. And what the father does is quite severe. The father, for example, orders the child to go down to the basement, which they're fearful of, and leaves the child in the basement for some time. Yes, I know. Some parents do that. And so in that moment, a fear is created. And so there's also a desire for something to look different. So I will ask the individual, or however many individuals, hi Trish, hi Danny, or anyways, naturally Danny, welcome. We are talking about fear today. So a child is locked in the basement by her parent and told to stay there as a form of punishment. And in a basement, it's dark. And even if it's not dark, most children, say, between 5, 6, 7, 8, even 9 or 10 might be fearful of the basement for whatever reason. So when you send a child into the basement, there's a number of things that are happening at different levels. But what I like the person to think about is more what they desired to happen. So the first question I ask in every forgiveness session is, what did you want from that person, say dad, who locked you in the basement, that they did not give, right? And so the person will identify precisely what they wanted. They will say, well, I wanted my dad to have a just way of treating me. They might not use those words. And I might say, well, what specifically would that look like? Well, it would look like a kind punishment, or it would look like, treatment that is loving. Even though you are trying to get me to behave properly, you would use appropriate punishment. And so the appropriateness of the punishment is what is desired. And then beyond that, I say to them, well, what else did you want? Well, I wanted my dad to recognize that I wasn't just being disobedient, but I wanted to express a thought or a desire that I had. I wanted him to accept the way that I was expressing myself. And so I go, aha, so you needed someone to receive your expression. That's okay, Trish, we'll see you. And so the idea is that we want somebody to receive us. We want them to see us. We want them to accept us. And that is that individual's need. The next question I ask is then, what did you get instead? And the person will say, well, I was inappropriately punished. I was locked in a basement. It was almost like I didn't belong. I was excluded. And so as a person begins to address all of those things, then I ask them to isolate the feelings that came along, and in that moment, there might be feelings of despair. There might be feelings of great anxiety and fear. The sense of loneliness and isolation that would come from being locked in a basement as a 6-year-old child would overwhelm anyone. You would feel like you're totally on your own. Whether God exists for you or not, you feel like you're being tortured and that you are completely alone. So I want you to notice some things here. I want you to notice first that the first question is, what did you want, is about an expression of the needs of the individual that would follow them across all moments in time. And what they got instead now is what becomes their fear. So whenever that individual feels excluded, whenever they feel like they've been shunned, whenever they feel like someone has put them in a position where they're literally in a basement, then they will respond with fear. And the responses will always be the same as the room. It will always be about despair. It will always be a sense of hopelessness. It will always be a sense of I'm alone, I'm isolated. And the anxiety that they experience in the room will show itself again and again. So I want to bring this up to another level because as we learn to be afraid, a lot of times we don't know what that fear connects to. So the next part of the therapeutic process is to actually then move the individual through understanding why the person behaved the way that they did. And so as the person behaves the way that they did, now the person who is actually doing the forgiveness begins to dissect why the person behaved the way that they did. Why they poured such fear into their lives. And I often say that the fear that other people pour into our lives is their own. And so they basically repattern on us something that has already been shown to them. So the process unfolds, and we do the same to others, where the fear that is poured onto us, we pour onto others. So there's always a mirroring that is happening. So as the process continues, then I really bring the person to an awareness and an understanding. I say to them, well, have you heard any stories? Has your dad talked about how he was treated? Has your dad ever given you any inclination in all of the storytelling that has gone on across time that you've heard that helps you to now understand what pattern he's repeating? And oftentimes a person is able to give me the storyline, and then we come to a place where we compassionately understand that this poor individual, in the same way that they've treated us in this terrible, awful way, that they have also experienced the same thing. And so as we become aware of that, there's an understanding and a compassion, not only for the other person, but ourselves. And then we're able to release them and let go. It's important for us to speak out loud the forgiveness, because in speaking it out loud, there are certain awarenesses and it brings to a conscious level the fears that we ourselves are now experiencing. So finally, we begin to understand the anxiety and the worry that we've always had. Finally, we begin to understand the anger and the rage and the things that inspire us to be malicious with other people. Finally, we begin to understand that we can stop it, because now we see and have power over how this all began. So as we continue the journey, the next part of the process is really saying out loud, I let go of my anger. I let go of my anxiety and my fear. I let go of the despair and the hopelessness that was implanted in this particular moment. And then as we begin and continue the journey, the next part is to say, I love you as a child of God, because that's really what all of us are. You know, egg and sperm are really a vessel for bringing us all into this world. The womb is our universe, and an understanding of what is happening with especially our mothers is coming in there. Genetically, there's a transmission of our personality, and genetically there's also a transmission of fear and some of the other things that have plagued our parents. It's like that transmission vessel that happens. So all of this is woven together, though, for us to learn certain lessons to make the world a better place. So as we continue our journey and we begin to actually learn how to love, one of the things that we learn in the room, as opposed to fear, is how to love. We begin to learn our love language and understand our love language right there in that moment where fear was first created. So if I am that child who was transported to the basement, and what I wanted was to be treated with love and kindness, even if you wanted to teach me how to behave properly, then I know what I do for others. I will see it in the way that I have patterned my life. I will begin to understand, oh, that's why I go out of my way to make sure that no matter put in their face. I go out of my way to make sure that people always feel included. That's why I go out of my way to make sure that even if someone needs to be told to do something differently, that I find a kind way of doing it. But there are still times when my fear language shows up. When there's a person who comes onto my path, into my path, whatever way you want to shape it, when that person enters my space, then I go to a place where I fear. And this is how my fear shows up. I cry. I moan and I groan about, the treatment. I become hopeful. I lay down and I don't fight back. I just kind of resign myself to the way that this is. And so we begin to look at our fears and our reactions and our responses in that same way. And as we begin to understand our responses, then we can say, okay, I was down, but now I rise. Now I get up and I actually do this differently. I don't have to live as a fearful person. Instead, I can live as a loving person. And so I begin to emulate more consistently love as opposed to fear. And I begin to now look at people differently. I begin to see them as these vessels that are carrying pain and that are fearful in and of themselves. And so when they begin to respond a certain way, whether it is malicious or proud or selfish or evil, when I begin to see those things, then I can look at that person and I can say, with all the compassion in my heart, I'm so sorry you're afraid. How can I help you right now? And sometimes you can help those people who are afraid because they can listen to your voice and calm down. And then for others, they're just so afraid that they will never calm down enough to actually listen to your voice. They'll never calm down enough until they do my forgiveness therapy. Everyone who comes into a therapy session with me will walk out with a full awareness of how they love, their particular love language, and a full awareness also of how they fear and their fear language. And power, as we all say, right? Power comes with knowledge. Knowledge and an awareness of ourselves gives us power over those things that make us afraid. So as we continue the journey, the forgiveness process is quite a lengthy one. It's not just saying, I forgive you, this is done. It's really about saying, I forgive you, but I remember what I've just learned. I forgive you, but I'm also making a decision that I will not lay down anymore. I will rise. I will become the epitome of what I think love is. I will now embrace all that there is to the aspects of love. And so love being forgiveness, being patient, being easygoing, being helpful, being humble, being respectful, being kind, being righteous, being accepting, trusting, supportive, gentle, calm, enduring, even obedient. A loving person is obedient. They will know their truth. They will be able to speak their truth, but they will also receive the truth of others. They will also live in a space where they can hear when other people are speaking truth and receive it. Or they can also hear when people are speaking falsehood and then deny it. So as we move through the rest of the forgiveness process, it's about saying, I love you, Father, brother, sister, cousin, whoever did the wrong to you. I love you, even though you did this to me. And I love you because you're a child of God. You're my brother. You're my sister under God. And so with a humanitarian kind of love, I accept where you are. I accept the fact that you couldn't love me in the way that I wanted you to. And so we move through and move on with the journey. I love you and I accept you for who you are. But now it's time for me to go on with my life. It's time for me to be healthy. It's time for me to go first. It's time for me to love. It's time for me to show others what love should look like. And so you make the decision now to go on in a way that is preserving your health and your happiness. You also begin to make decisions about who comes into your life and then move on with the journey of living. The very last part of the forgiveness process is a promise to ourselves. I choose to live. I choose not to die, because when we despair, we're hopeless about the future. We might actually make the decision to end our lives. When we are isolated and alone, it can feel like we're on this journey all by ourselves, but we can make a decision to say, if no one else is with me, I know that God is for me. God is my source of strength. This is where I rely on the God of the universe to protect me. We begin to stand still. One of my favorite verses in the Bible says, be still and I will fight for you. So in our stillness, God then takes up the fight and on our behalf then begins to allow certain changes and shifts to happen. And they begin to happen quite instantaneously. It's quite amazing, actually. And the last part of the forgiveness process is about saying, I choose to be like Christ and to mirror Christ. And I know there are a lot of people who don't desire to be religious, and I don't desire you to be religious. I desire you to be spiritual, because Christ was about forgiveness. He was about love. He was about reconciliation with those who were so afraid. And so the whole journey then takes us through a process where now we begin to mirror the true light, the true love that there is. We begin to be compassionate. We begin to be kind and respectful. We are humble. We are respectful, and we also partner with other people. We collaborate. We become good friends to others. And not only do we become all of those things, but we are consistent. And the consistency is what changes everything. So as we march through a forgiveness process, fear, in the fear language that is unique to each of us, is what we must find and figure out and conquer. And then love, our particular love language, becomes more pronounced to us. And we begin to live a life where we forgive and we live fearlessly. So that's my talk for today. I didn't see any questions from anyone who was online, but I hope that if you are watching this afterwards, that you send me some messages or some comments and some questions that you may have. I hope this fills you up. Have a great afternoon, everyone.